Let's talk about this cartoon, and at a deeper level, let's talk about what is the role of a political satirist in society. So the role of a political satirist, right? I hope I'm pronouncing this word correctly. But the role of a political satirist, such as Zapiro, is that they provide visual commentary on the political events as they unfold in a particular country, in a particular region. And as the saying goes, a picture can paint 1,000 words. They often do so in a funny way, in a way that elicits a laugh from the audience, in a way that actually uses humor to convey a political message. And in doing their work, they influence the perceptions of the people that consume that particular medium, the cartoon, right? Which is what we're talking about in this instance. The jokes of a satirist, though, we must be very cognizant of this, are not value neutral. They often have an agenda, and they often depict people either as heroes or as villains, or they depict them as competent or incompetent. Let's think about the jokes of Trevor Noah, right? Trevor Noah, when he was coming up on the South African scene, made a variety of comedy specials. And I was a big fan of Trevor Noah. I still am a big fan of Trevor Noah. He's a generational talent as a public speaker, as a comedian. That guy just always makes me laugh. However, having consumed all of his comedy, I realized that Trevor Noah made jokes at the expense of Jacob Zuma. Jokes about how Zuma could not read large numbers. You know, the 17, 15 million, wait for it, hold on, I was just checking if you are paying attention type of jokes. He made a lot of those jokes around how Zuma could not read large numbers, right? He also made jokes about how Zuma could not type. His depiction of Zuma typing was often, hello to Lee Madonsela. You are a very beautiful woman. I will not be paying for the upgrades to Ngandla. That was how he portrayed Jacob Zuma. Always making fun of his intelligence, always making fun of his competence. However, if you are honest, and if you follow Trevor Noah's comedy, you'll recognize that he didn't make any jokes whatsoever about President Ramaphosa and the Ramaphosa era. He has been very, very charitable by avoiding any comedy around that. Even when Zweli Mkhize, for instance, was buying those motorbike ambulances during the pandemic, even when they were overcharging masks that they were getting for a particular amount of money, and then those cloth masks were now costing 50 Rand or even more. No jokes from Trevor Noah. You mean to tell me there were no jokes, and that there's no jokes even now about Phala Phala? I mean, a president having millions of US dollars in his sofas, in his furniture. What level of posturepedic is 100,000 US dollars? When you're sitting on the sofa and you're putting your bum down there, what kind of back pain is sorted out by, you know, maybe guys, maybe you're doing this back pain issue wrong, right? You think that you need to get Sealy and to get these mattresses with this special feather and what and all of this. No. Just put a couple of 100,000 US dollars and your back will firm up just fine. You'll be walking on the beach, you know, very, very jovial with a spring in your step. I mean, you guys, you're doing this thing wrong. Find a few Ankole, kettle to sell and fix your back problems if you have a back problem. Anyway, in as much as I'm just making these trivial and half-hearted attempts at jokes around Pala Pala, you cannot tell me that there's nothing funny that has happened in the last 6 years of the Ramaphosa administration, something that warrants a joke from a comedian of the stature of Trevor Noah. If he had cracked those jokes, you would know them. In the same way that you know the jokes about Jacob Zuma and how he was dodging scandals like he was in the Matrix, you know, moving like Neo. You know all the jokes that Trevor cracked about the ANC of Zuma, but you know zero jokes about the jokes he cracked about any other version of the ANC, because he did not. Right? The point that I'm making is that the jokes or the portrayals or the depictions made by a satirist or a comedian are not necessarily at everyone's expense, particularly in political satire. It's better when they are, because that comedian or cartoonist really earns over the public. Right? Is it cartoonist or cartoonist? My pronunciations are very African. I'm an African. Tabombegi, I'm an African. So sometimes I will mispronounce those words. If you're watching from the UK or America, please bear with us. We are in Africa now. We cannot be pronouncing everything the way that you like, the way that you would prefer. We have to do things our way. But anyway, I'm just making this point that great comedians laugh at themselves, they laugh at others, and they also laugh at friends and foes alike. Everybody gets it. No one is safe. Whenever, though, a political satirist, a cartoonist, a comedian makes jokes subjectively, then we have to be cognizant of that and point it out to say, hey, how come you only find this thing funny? You don't find the other thing funny. You find it funny when this guy makes a mistake, but you don't find it funny when the other guy makes a mistake. That is worthy of being pointed out. Zapiro is the most prominent cartoonist in South Africa, and he works prominently and mainly within the dominant media framework with Daily Maverick, a framework which basically includes the likes of News 24, Daily Maverick, Business Day, Mail and Guardian, Sunday Times, City Press. This is the framework through which we often see Zapiro's cartoons being portrayed, a framework of mainstream media which is discussed extensively in books such as this book. I'm going to show you this book right now. In this book, Manufacturing Consent, a book written by Edward S. Herman and Noam Chomsky, they discuss the lens that is curated in public discourse by dominant media and how that affects political economy in any country wherein there is a propaganda model through the mainstream media. And South Africa has the same attributes that are described in this particular book. South Africa has the same issues, right? So these publications that these cartoons appear in are owned by a few individuals who are, in the main, billionaires from Stellenbosch with their roots in Stellenbosch, right? Whether it's Rupert, whether it's Koos Becker and Media 24. And their primary audience is the middle class and the elites in South Africa. These are audiences that pay for advertising and are the audiences that work in corporate South Africa. The audiences that these publications are making jokes for, content for, are the people who move from private school to the private sector, right? And this is what I want to now talk about in respect to the cartoon by Zapiro and the debate around this particular cartoon. When you look at this cartoon, right, in this cartoon, he is dealing with the topic of the recent departures from the EFF, right? He portrays those members who have left, members such as Floyd Shivambu, Busisiwe Mkhwebane, as rats, right? By extension, he is portraying the members of the EFF as rats. There's an old English saying, like rats from a sinking ship, which he is clearly making reference to in this particular cartoon with this portrayal of some version of the Titanic and the stand that Julius Malema stood on when the EFF was doing their 10-year anniversary celebrations. Firstly, I want to discuss this premise of the sinking ship. Is the EFF really a sinking ship? or is it too soon to tell? I'm of the view that it's actually not a sinking ship, but it's a ship which is currently in turbulent waters. Let's look at the numbers. The EFF dropped from 10.8% or 1.8 million votes to 1.5 million votes or 9.52%. This is a drop. You can't deny that. That's what the numbers say. But it is not a steep drop. For instance, when you look at how the ANC did, the ANC dropped from 57% to 40%. That is a significant drop. If there was a sinking ship in the last election, the sinking ship is not the EFF, in my opinion. The sinking ship is the ANC. Sure, they are in power, right? They are in power, but that doesn't mean that the ship is not sinking. A ship can have a hole that is taking in water, still be moving and still be above the surface, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the ship is not sinking. In percentage terms, if you look at the rate of decline, the EFF rate of decline is 14% from 2019 to 2024, but the ANC declined by double that at 29.8% rate of decline. So where are the cartoons from Zapiro about the ANC being a sinking ship? Because surely that is the biggest story from the election. It's not that the EFF dropped 1%, right? It's actually that the ANC dropped by 17%, which was a drop which followed another drop where they dropped from 62 to 57. So in the last two elections, the ANC has dropped from 62% to 40%, which is 22% lost of voter support in two elections, the Ramaphosa elections. This is something that I think we need to have scrutiny of and be objective about. Whether you like the EFF or not, who has lost more? The media is using this tactic of manufacturing consent to focus on the EFF as the sinking ship, when in reality, the party which is most in trouble, according to the election results, is the ANC. That's the party that is in the most trouble. But the focus of the media is praising the GNU, but being very interested in pushing a narrative that the EFF is in decline. The EFF has lost votes. They are in turbulent waters. But I don't think that those votes are something that we can say there's a sinking ship, particularly because most of the votes that they lost, they were on 1.8 million, they are now on 1.5 million. They lost 300,000 votes in KwaZulu-Natal. Right? Why did they lose 300,000 votes in KwaZulu-Natal? Because there was a political party called MK, which came in and took a lot of those votes. But MK took more votes from the ANC than it did from the EFF. The ANC in KwaZulu-Natal dropped from 50-something to 17%. That's how significant their drop was in KwaZulu-Natal. So we have to be honest. So what I'm trying to say is that the premise of the cartoon, I think, is dishonest, right? The second thing I want to discuss is this depiction of EFF members as rats. I think in Africa we have a very powerful lesson that we have learned about the dehumanization of political rivals. The Tutsis were called cockroaches on radio before the Rwandan genocide in 1994. Partly as a result of those portrayals and the villainization and the dehumanization of the Tutsis, they were killed en masse. They were brutalized, they were killed. The dehumanization of political rivals is often the first step towards the commission of atrocities. But even if there are no atrocities to the scale of what happened in Rwanda, the dehumanization of political rivals diminishes tolerance and it opens the door for abuse. Those who we deem to be evil or bad or inferior in the political space do not get the same benefit of doubt, they do not get the same tolerance, and their supporters are often victims of intimidation, violence, brutality, and bullying. It's a reality. These actions of intimidation, bullying, violence, targeting can happen in offices and in the townships. People who are viewed as being supporters of the EFF may not be promoted because they are radical, they are problematic. They may get more calls to HR than other members of other political parties. Why do these things sometimes happen? Because we are comfortable with painting them as rats, which is akin to what happened in Rwanda. So I don't think that in this context that we have in Africa and the history that we know, I don't think that it's correct for anybody to be portraying these individuals from any political party as some version of an animal, particularly a disease-infested animal such as a rat. It is like the worst rodent, and he has portrayed them as that. I think it was wrong for Zapiro to use these portrayals of the EFF as rats. Further, I have looked at Zapiro's cartoons. I just did a cursory look at this year's cartoons, but I've bought some of the Zapiro books over the years, and I've always looked at his cartoons. Sometimes I found them to be enjoyable. He does not always portray human beings as animals, even those human beings that he deeply disagrees with. He has not portrayed Benjamin Netanyahu, for example, as an animal, even though he is critical of him and his, interventions in Gaza and against Hamas. He has not portrayed him as an animal. He has not portrayed John Steinhazen as an animal, although he is critical of him and often makes fun of him. He has, however, portrayed Dr. John Hlophe as a vampire, Advocate Busiwe Mkhwebane as a flea. Do you see the difference there? Do you see the difference? And I'm going to put up some of these portrayals as I'm speaking so that you can see them. Riti Tlabi has given a counter-argument. She's a seasoned broadcaster, a journalist who's working now internationally. She made this counter-argument on Twitter. She said, "Rats leaving or fleeing a sinking ship is an old idiom. It is used commonly to describe a failing enterprise or an exodus. So you could say the jab is directed at the ship and not the rats who are abandoning it." It's not literal. That's what she's saying. To reflect on this and to respond, I think she's half right. There is one interpretation which will be just as she said, that this is just a saying and is a jab and it's not literal. But we must be cognizant of this reality. Art is open to more than one interpretation, and the work of an artist can also be studied by looking at other depictions that have come from that particular artist. If a comedian is often making one side a mockery of and not the other, I think that is relevant to be considered. I think that there is an interpretation which really does not want to acknowledge, but which does lead to people taking offense, and one that does lead to people dehumanizing the targets of the cartoon. And you can't rule out these other interpretations and say they are simply unreasonable or unrealistic. You are not always going to be in the room to correct those who look at that art in that way or who interpret that portrayal in that way. And what I want to say is, if your art is dehumanizing and subjective in whom it dehumanizes, I think it's fair for that art to be called out as offensive and problematic. And if you habitually do that kind of art, it may even be fair for people to describe you as a problematic artist. Now, I think if art has a risk of causing harm to the people it portrays, then it should not necessarily be made. Of course, everyone has free speech. We know that artists have free rights to make art, and I'm not saying that that right should go away. I'm saying that ethically, we should consider that, hey, you're drawing people as fleas, as vampires, as rats. If these depictions can lead to the real world abuse of those people or a risk of the real world abuse of those people, should those depictions continue? We've seen things happening on farms which are quite atrocious. Quite atrocious, quite worrying. Then the question becomes, does this art lead to those kind of outcomes? I don't know, guys. What do you think? Let's have a conversation. Let's have a conversation. Till the next one.